Okay, welcome to the interior of the KC-97. You've seen the exterior, now I'm just going to take you through the interior of the airplane. And keep in mind, this is a tanker, so this airplane carries fuel for itself and other aircraft.
You know what's funny? It looks big on the outside, but it actually looks even bigger inside when you get to the
This is a large airplane. So, into the cockpit.
So here we are inside. Okay. Oh my goodness. I can't believe how many gadgets there are.
Yeah.
Like,
This is a lot of cockpit for an airplane. Yeah, but again, this is a 1950s, late 1940s, early 50s airplane. A lot of the airplane had in those days has been updated and modified and made more automatic in today's modern aircraft.
So there were usually four people. Was there one and one
yes.
in here?
You'd have the captain, pilot in charge here on the left forward seat. And over here you'd have his co-pilot, both with the capability of flying the airplane independently or together.
Right.
The instruments, while they look fairly complicated, most of your flight instruments are on the left side and the outboard right side. Everything that controls the engines is in the center. This location here is flight engineer. He has control of all the aircraft systems, which are all these dials and buttons. He also has some control of what the boom operator can do. This is an in-flight refueling panel that they can manage fuel as it's going out.
And they were signaling down there to the boom
They're
operator.
gonna, we'll wind up down there.
Or the boom operator was all the way down there.
He's he's all the way in the tail.
They were signaling down there.
They can control the master panel here, but he has control back there.
But they were kind of communicating because
yes,
it's hard to communicate all the way back.
Yeah, they're all of them are on headsets.
No, I see how big it is. You can't be like, hey.
No, they're all on headsets and they're all and they're in communication with the airplane receiving the fuel. So they're talking to that pilot as well. So everybody knows what's going on. You're sitting in what would be the navigator station. So a lot of this here is radios and radar scopes and directional compasses to help the navigator make sure the airplane gets to where it has to be. If you consider the mission that these airplanes would fly, they have to go out to where they expect an airplane to come to them at. So if the combat airplanes are flying a mission into Europe and he's not going to have enough fuel, they know, to get all the way back to his home station, they have to calculate how much fuel he will have consumed and how long he can wait for this airplane to get there. Normally they would fly this airplane out in advance so they'd be able to what they call loiter in the area where the other plane is expected to arrive so that they could fuel him up so he could continue on to his home base.
What I love about this is that you guys have some of the original. Yeah,
there are some original documents. I haven't looked at these specifically, but they look much like fuel loads.
This is from the time.
Yeah.
You can tell this paper's from the time, and that's really cool to see all that, and that they're keeping track. Like you said, that's a very important thing to keep track of.
It
if you
is.
don't have enough fuel,
that's the. It certainly is, and that's part of what the navigator and the flight engineer do is keep track of fuel consumed and distance traveled, and making sure they're on the right track. And he's got the fuel on board to complete the mission.
Okay. Let's tour the rest of the plane.
Okay, so why don't I take you on back to the booming station. What you're looking at here are actual fuel tanks. You know, typically a large airplane like this, they carry their fuel in the wings. That's your typical fuel tanks. But here we have an airplane that has to have fuel in its own right to operate, and it has to have enough fuel for other aircraft to be taking fuel on board. So these are added tanks, and if you were to go down below where we're sitting, there's a whole another bank of these down below us. So this airplane has quite a bit of fuel capacity in it.
Why did it have seats? Is this for its
you could also carry troops and passengers and cargo on board the airplane. You have tie downs on the floor if you had pallets of material. You could secure them so they wouldn't move around in the cabin. So this is all typical configuration.
So how much does this plane weigh?
It's probably about 380,000 pounds. I'd have to go. I would have to go look at the data sheets to.
It's so I just can't really get over how massive it is, and it makes sense. It has to be like this. It has to carry.
The airplane grows as a result of the demand for the mission. Just like a passenger airliner, you buy them in different sizes and different gauges. These are the same.
This is the one plane you really don't want to blow up anywhere.
No. So watch where you step. It does get kind of dark back in here, and I wish we had a little more light, but
Oh, this is good. We like to see it authentic and how
Okay.
it was. I love this. What were these seats sectioned off? What's the purpose of that? Do you know?
What's that?
Why these are sectioned off like this? These seats?
It's just the way they configured the airplane for seating. These are a little more probably officers' seats.
This is the first class station, everyone.
Yeah, it could very well be. And then on the side, these might very well be set up for troops that might be in their full combat gear, and they'd never fit in these seats here. So back here is the boom operator station, otherwise known as the gas passer. And
so he sits. Where does he?
He would actually literally lay down. If you can see it down on the floor.
Cool. I was going to ask and see. Wow.
And he's watching the airplanes approaching from down through his windows. And he has a couple of joysticks that he can operate with his hands, and he can fly the boom. So you can't see it from this angle. But down below us, if you look at it, the boom has a couple of wings on it, and those are movable, and he can control those. So he's got a target that's probably about 8 inches in diameter on the receiving airplane that he has to connect up to. And the pilot flying the receiving airplane has the same burden. He has to get it close enough, because most of them, if they're a rigid boom like this one is, it's up behind where his head is. So he has to get his airplane to a position where the boom operator can actually make the connection. And once it's all connected, then he can start transferring fuel for the other airplane. And they've pretty much determined in advance how much he's going to have, 10,000 gallons or 1,000 gallons, whatever it's going to take to complete his mission.
This is incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, this is amazing technology. And in-flight refueling is kind of an American thing. This was developed in the late 40s. The airplane that we didn't see today, the B-25, has a model that was the first actual in-flight refueling receiver airplane, the bomber.
Oh, wow.
And we don't have that particular model here, but the basic airplane is here. But that was the very first one.
Yeah, because it have to be a certain kind of receive. You can't
you
just
have to build a whole tank system into the airplane to take on the fuel. Wow. And you have to build the connection point. Like on your car, you have a place where you put your the hose nozzle. These airplanes also, the receivers have to have a nozzle connection to receive fuel.
Do you know if they added that feature to a lot of existing flights? Because it seems like a lot to just create new. I know everything technology newer, but did they create that to old ones?
Yeah, it starts to progress. The B-45, which is here, one of the models of that airplane was modified to take on in-flight refueling. So they did that.
So they did modify to existing planes.
They had to modify those airplanes and put extra plumbing in to transfer the fuel from the receptacle that receives it to the tank where they're going to store it, which is usually in one of the main tanks.
Right.
But then once they figure that all out, they got the mod done, then it starts becoming production.
Right.
So this airplane, for the military's purposes, went into production with the intent of being a in-flight refueling airplane. And of course the design allows them to modify other airplanes as they come along. But normally they come off the production line. It tended to be in-flight refuelers.
So when's like the first war that they actually used this feature in?
Probably the Korean War. This actual in-flight refueling that I know of didn't really start formally during World War II.
I wouldn't
there
think so.
There are some interesting stories of a local aviator gentleman by the name of McCready, from Merced. When he was an officer back in the 20s, after World War I, he and a few of his coworkers, actually did one of the very first in-flight refueling transfers between two airplanes. And that would have been probably 1920, 1919, after World War I. And that has just simply progressed. And it's become something, what they did was transfer drop a hose from one airplane to the other and let gravity flow the fuel. And now you can see how sophisticated from that very, very primitive approach, the concept has grown and the technology has developed to do that. So we don't have any, but the newer models are DC-10s that have been converted to do this, and also the 767, both started out as commercial airplanes. They have also been converted into tankers like this.
This is really neat. This is definitely something to check out, everybody, on Open Cockpit Day, because remember, Open Cockpit Day is the time when you get to come in the planes, and it happens twice a year, so stay tuned for those dates.
Yep.